The Ledger. In a small village that was neither particularly near nor far from anything of importance, there lived an old man named Harold. He was not remarkable in appearance or reputation. His hair had once been brown, though it had long since turned the color of dust, and what little remained of it he combed carefully each morning in front of a mirror that had a faint crack running along its edge. The house in which he lived had 2 rooms, one smaller than the other, both of them containing things that had not been moved in years. Harold's daily life followed a pattern that was not strict, but had nonetheless become fixed through long repetition. Each morning, he woke at roughly the same hour, though not exactly the same, and sat for a time on the edge of his bed, looking at the floorboards. They were wide and dark with age, and each had a slightly different pattern of grain. He knew them well. He had often thought that he might polish them someday, but he never quite got around to it. The idea lingered in his mind like a quiet echo, not unwelcome, not pressing. The day in question began like most others, without any event that might distinguish it. The light came through the single window of his room in a pale, slanted beam. He could tell by the quality of the light that it was not raining, though it might have rained earlier. He put on his socks, one after the other, sitting very still as he did so. Then his trousers, then his shirt. None of these actions required thought. They were habits performed not out of necessity, but because there was nothing better to do. When he reached the kitchen, he found the kettle in its usual place, next to the small tin of tea leaves. He measured them with care, perhaps a little too much care, and poured the water. The kettle took its time heating. While it did, he sat at the small wooden table, which bore faint circular stains from long-forgotten cups. The wood had been sanded smooth years ago and had since lost any particular smell. On the wall hung a clock that ticked regularly, each second following the last without variation. After tea, Harold opened the cupboard where he kept his papers. Among them was a ledger, bound in worn brown leather. It had belonged to his father, though Harold had long since filled most of it with his own records. The ledger contained nothing of great interest, only lists of small expenditures, notes about weather, and occasional remarks on the condition of his garden. Still, Harold liked to keep it updated. It gave him something to do. He carried the ledger to the table and opened it. The last entry, written 2 days earlier, read, "Bought new candle, 3 pence." Below it, he drew a faint line, dipped his pen in ink, and paused. He could not immediately think of anything worth writing, He considered noting that he had used some of the candle yesterday evening, but that did not seem worth recording. After a long pause, he finally wrote, "Wind stronger today. Tea leaves almost gone." He blotted the ink carefully and closed the book. Satisfied, if that word could be used, he set the ledger aside and looked out the window. The view, as always, was of a narrow lane bordered by a low stone wall and a few sparse trees. A bird sat on one of the branches for a time, then flew away. He watched it go until it was no longer visible, and then kept looking at the same spot for several moments longer, just in case. The rest of the morning passed in the quiet way that mornings often do when nothing in particular demands attention. Harold cleaned the spoon he had used, wiped the table with a cloth that did not need washing, and then examined the corner of the room where the wallpaper had begun to peel. He thought about gluing it back, but the thought remained only that, a thought, unacted upon and not urgent. By midday, he felt it was time to inspect the garden. It was not much of a garden anymore, only a few square yards of soil behind the house, where a few plants persisted, out of habit more than care. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him with its familiar click. The air was still, though occasionally interrupted by a faint breeze that seemed to arrive late and leave early. He looked at the ground. There were weeds, though not many. He crouched to pull one up, then reconsidered, then pulled it up anyway. The roots came free with a small clump of soil attached. He brushed the dirt from his fingers. Then, after some time, he found another weed and did the same. It took a while before he realized he had cleared perhaps a small patch, no bigger than a plate. He straightened up slowly and looked at what he had done. It was neither impressive nor disappointing. At the far end of the garden stood a barrel where he collected rainwater. It was half full. He stood next to it and looked into it. The surface reflected his face, slightly warped. A small leaf floated near the edge. He reached in, pushed it toward the center, then let it go. The ripples spread, then faded. He watched until the water was still again. Back inside, he sat for a time without doing anything. The clock ticked steadily. He noticed that one of its hands had gathered a bit of dust. He thought about wiping it, but decided it would be difficult to reach without moving the clock itself. That seemed like more effort than necessary. He opened the ledger again, turned back several pages, and read entries from earlier in the year. Repaired fence. Took 2 days. Bread from market. smelled as fresh as last week, found small nail near doorstep, kept it. He read these notes with neither nostalgia nor curiosity. They simply were. He considered faintly that there was something satisfying about the act of writing things down, even if those things did not matter. As the afternoon wore on, the light in the room began to change. Slowly, imperceptibly, the sun never came directly through the window. Instead, it drifted behind the clouds, leaving a diffuse brightness that shifted in tone rather than in strength. Harold noticed this without really noticing it. He stood up, walked to the cupboard, and checked the level of his tea tin again. It was, as he had already written, almost empty. He thought about going to the market tomorrow, though tomorrow felt very far away. He took another slow walk through the house. In the corner near the stairs stood a small wooden stool with one loose leg. He pressed on it gently to see how much it wobbled. It did wobble, but not excessively. He nodded slightly to himself, as if this confirmed something, though it was not clear what. Then he moved on. He paused at the window again. The sky was still gray, though in a slightly different way now. He could see faint movement among the branches of the trees. He thought about how long it had been since he had walked beyond the lane. It must have been weeks, perhaps months. There was no reason to go far. The fields beyond the wall looked much the same as they always had. He sat back down and opened the ledger once more. He drew another small line under the last entry, dipped his pen, and wrote, "Garden mostly fine. Barrel half full." He dried the ink carefully. Then he added, after some hesitation, "Dust on clock hand." Left it. He nodded slightly, then closed the book again. Evening came without hurry. The light faded in the same slow, colorless way that it had arrived. Harold lit a candle, the same one he had bought for 3 pence. The flame flickered once, then steadied. He watched it for some time, then adjusted the wick slightly, though it did not need adjusting. The small change in brightness was almost imperceptible, yet he noticed it anyway. He ate a simple supper: bread, a small piece of cheese, and some pickled vegetables. The bread was dry, though not unpleasantly so. He chewed slowly, with long pauses between bites. Occasionally, he glanced at the candle, though it continued burning at the same steady rate. After eating, he wiped the knife with the corner of the cloth, folded it once, and set it back in the drawer. He listened to the sound of the clock ticking in the other room. It occurred to him that it might be running slightly fast, though he couldn't be sure. He decided to check it against the church bell tomorrow, assuming he remembered. For a while,